They devour fear, yet one human's courage left the alien Huntress powerless. This is not just another story about survival in the stars. It is about the moment when the most terrifying predator of the galaxy met a man who refused to tremble, and what happened shook the foundation of everything the universe believed about humans. The galaxy had whispered about them for centuries, a race not known for claws or strength or machines. But for something worse, they fed on fear where others hunted. Flesh or blood, this species thrived on the terror of their prey. They arrived in silence. Their ships were like shadows that blocked out the suns, and when they descended, entire civilizations fell without weapons being fired. The panic was enough. The screams of billions were their feast, and fear was their only hunger. Huntress was one of their finest. She was tall with movements sharp like blades. Her skin shimmered with strange dark patterns that seemed alive, and her eyes burned like fire. Her presence filled every living being with dread. She could draw fear out like smoke from a candle, and consume it as easily as breath wherever she walked. Chaos followed when her ship cut through the skies of the ruined colony world. She expected nothing more than another easy harvest. Humans had already been broken by war and famine, their defenses destroyed, their voices full of despair. This was perfect for her. She landed among the ruins, her long shadow crawling over the broken towers and shattered streets. She tasted the fear in the air and smiled. It was rich. It was everywhere among the ruins. Daniel walked alone, his clothes torn, his hands rough with dirt and ash. He was not a soldier or a leader. He was simply a man who had seen too much. His colony had burned. His family was gone. His friends scattered or dead. Yet he moved with calm steps, carrying nothing but a broken piece of metal pipe for protection. There was no panic in his eyes, only a heavy silence that looked almost like peace. The Huntress saw him from above. She felt the ripple of fear in the colony. But around this one man there was something wrong. She stalked him, moving quietly from shadow to shadow, waiting for the moment to strike. She expected the delicious surge of terror when he noticed her, but when she appeared before him, rising from the mist of the ruins, Daniel only stopped walking and looked at her, his eyes steady. No scream, no stumble, just silence. She spread her wings, sharp and black, her voice echoing in his mind, feeding images of death and horror into his thoughts. She had done this countless times before with kings and warriors and children. All of them broke before her. She waited for him to fall to his knees, to beg, to cry out. But nothing happened. Daniel simply stood holding his broken pipe as if it were enough. Huntress reached into his mind, expecting to pull out the familiar taste of fear. But when she touched his spirit, she found emptiness, not the emptiness of ignorance or stupidity, but a void carved out by pain already endured. He had felt terror before and survived it until it no longer had power. She tasted nothing. Her hunger snapped back against her like fire in her throat. Daniel spoke quietly, his voice calm as stone. If you came to scare me, you are late. I have no fear left to give. The Huntress froze. His words struck deeper than any weapon she had faced. Prey who fought with guns or fire, but never prey who denied her the very food of her soul. Her eyes narrowed. She circled him, trying again, whispering images of darkness, monsters, screams of his lost family. Yet Daniel did not bend. He only breathed slow and steady around them. The ruins echoed with the distant cries of other survivors. The fear of the colony was still strong, but this one man stood like a rock in the storm, and it unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She told herself it was a trick, that he was hiding his fear deep down. But when she reached again, she found only the same unshakable void. For the first time in her long life, the Huntress felt something strange, not satisfaction, not hunger, not victory, but doubt. She looked at him and realized that he was not resisting with strength or weapons. He was simply refusing to be afraid. She did not understand it, and in that lack of understanding she felt a shadow flicker inside her, something dangerous, something her kind had never known. Daniel did not attack her. He did not run. He simply turned and walked away, as if she were nothing but another ruin left behind in the ashes, and that insult burned her more than weapons ever could. Prey was supposed to scream, Prey was supposed to tremble, yet this human walked away, leaving her hungry and powerless. The huntress clenched her claws. She would not allow this. She could not allow this. His courage was a poison, and if left unchecked, it would spread. She promised herself. She would break him, even if it took everything she had. She would dig into his soul and tear out fear, or she would be destroyed trying. But as she watched him disappear into the ruins, she felt her chest tighten with a sensation. She had no word for her people devoured fear. But now in the silence of her heart, she realized a terrifying truth. She was not feeding anymore. She was starving, and for the first time the great huntress felt the smallest echo of what humans called fear. They devour fear, yet one human's courage left the alien huntress powerless. And after that first strange meeting, the ruins of the human colony changed forever, because fear was no longer flowing the same way. And for the huntress, this was more dangerous than any weapon. The colony had been broken long before her arrival, its towers blackened and broken, its streets filled with dust and smoke. The people who still lived there were shadows of themselves, moving from shelter to shelter with hollow eyes. They were used to running. They were used to hiding. Their fear was heavy in the air, like smoke, easy to drink for the hunters who fed on it. And the huntress had never doubted that these humans would give her everything she desired. But now she found her mind returning again and again to the man who did not tremble. His name, she learned, was Daniel. He was no soldier, no leader, no scientist. He was a survivor like the rest. And yet he was different, because when she looked at him, she saw no weakness in his mind, no breaking point that she could reach. His fear was burned away, and in its place was something her kind had never faced before, a calm that made her hunger turn sour. Daniel moved among the survivors, helping them in quiet ways. He gave food when he found it. He lifted broken beams when others were trapped. He carried water when others were too weak. His voice was not loud, and his steps were not proud. But people began to watch him, because when he stood near them, their panic seemed to ease. They did not know why, but somehow his presence made their hearts beat slower. The huntress stalked him at a distance. She tried again and again to pull terror out of him. She sent dreams into his sleep, filling them with fire and screams. She filled the air around him with illusions of monsters waiting in the shadows. She whispered lies into the minds of survivors, hoping they would turn against him and break him down. But each time he remained calm, his dreams burned away. The illusions, his eyes stayed steady, and his voice quieted the frightened humans who came to him at night. When Daniel rested under the broken walls, he remembered his past, and this was where his strength came from. Years before the colony fell, he had known fear every day. He had lived through war. He had seen the faces of his family fade one by one. He had run from fire. He had buried the ones he loved. He had felt the endless pain of loss until fear itself lost meaning. He no longer feared, because the worst had already come, and he had survived it. The huntress could not understand this. She had always believed fear was endless, that it could never be burned away. Yet when she reached into Daniel, she tasted only the ashes of old pain, and those ashes fed her nothing. She grew restless. She grew hungry. She had never been denied before, and this denial shook her more than she admitted. The survivors began to whisper about Daniel. Some said he was cursed. Some said he was chosen. Some said he was no longer fully human. But they all felt something when he stood among them. Their terror dulled, and their breaths grew stronger. The huntress saw this, and rage boiled inside her, because courage was spreading, and courage was poison to her kind. She confronted him once more in the ruins, standing before him in the pale light, her wings sharp, her eyes burning. She poured all her power into her voice, demanding. He kneeled, demanding. He admit fear, demanding he remember the screams of his family and fall apart. Daniel only looked at her with tired eyes and said, "You cannot take from me what is already gone." And with those words, her chest burned with confusion, because for the first time the one who hunted fear began to feel weak. Herself, the huntress, knew she could not allow this to continue. If Daniel's courage spread to more survivors, soon the entire colony might resist, and then she would not only starve, But she would face something her race had never faced before, prey that no longer gave them power. She decided she would break him fully. She would strip away every last fragment of peace he carried until he screamed like the rest. As she prepared her mind for this battle, she felt a crack inside herself, something strange, something alien. She had never been afraid of prey, yet now when she thought of Daniel, she felt a small sting like a knife at the edge of her heart. Was it anger? Was it hunger? Or was it something worse? She could not name it, but she knew it was dangerous. The survivors did not understand what was happening, but they followed Daniel more closely with each passing day. He did not call himself a leader. He did not ask for them to follow, but in silence they gathered near him, because when he stood against the Huntress and did not bend, their hope grew stronger, and hope was the one thing her kind could not devour. The Huntress returned to her lair, high above the ruins, her body restless, her mind dark. She should have been full from the fear of hundreds, yet she felt hollow. She replayed Daniel's calm eyes over and over, and the echo of his words stayed inside her. I have no fear left to give. That emptiness haunted her more than any scream she had ever tasted. As the moon rose over the broken colony, she vowed to herself that she would end this human. She would crush him in body and mind. She would drown the survivors in terror until they forgot his calm eyes. Yet even as she swore this vow, she could not silence the echo inside her, the echo of her own unease, because if Daniel could resist her, what if others could too? And if others learned that secret, then her kind's reign of fear would not last. Daniel, meanwhile, sat among the ruins, looking at the stars, broken, yet endless. He did not call himself brave. He only knew that fear had already taken everything from him, and he would not give it more. He thought of the people around him, the tired eyes of children, the trembling hands of mothers, the broken voices of the old, and he made a promise in silence he would not let them see him fall. And as the night deepened, the Huntress closed her eyes, trying to rest, but instead of sweet fear feeding her, she felt hunger clawing inside. And for the first time in her long life, she understood what it was to starve. They devour fear, yet one human's courage left the alien Huntress powerless. And now the truth of it began to grow like a fire in the ruins of the colony. For the Huntress, who had always known victory, the taste of defeat was something she could not accept, and for the first time she began to unravel. She stalked the colony day and night, her wings cutting across the sky, her shadow falling over the broken streets. The survivors trembled at her presence, but their fear was no longer the endless ocean it had been before. For every scream she pulled from the people, she felt her hunger satisfied only for a moment, before the taste turned bitter, because hidden in the ruins was the one man who gave her nothing, and his emptiness poisoned her feast. Daniel had become a strange figure among the survivors. He did not speak of leadership, he did not raise banners or give speeches. He only worked quietly, giving food, helping the weak, guarding the small children who cried in the night. And yet wherever he went, the survivors felt their trembling lessen. When he looked into their eyes, they felt as if they could breathe again, as if the nightmare would not last forever. They did not call him a hero, but they stayed close to him because he made the terror weaker. The Huntress could not stand it. She had been raised to believe fear was endless and absolute, that no creature in the galaxy could resist it. Yet here was a man who stood like a stone while she poured every shadow and every scream against him. She entered his dreams, night after night, showing him fire, showing him loss, showing him death. But every time she reached for his fear, she touched only the memory of pain already endured, and pain did not feed her. It starved her. Her body grew weaker with each day, her strength fading, her sharp form losing its shimmer. She told herself it was temporary, that she would find a way to break him. She hunted him in the ruins, surrounding him with illusions of his lost family, whispering that it was his fault, whispering that he had failed. But Daniel only stood in silence, and when the illusions faded, his calm eyes burned into her mind until she turned away. Among her kind, she had always been called the strongest, the one who could drain fear even from warriors who swore they would not bend. But now she feared a secret she had never spoken aloud. What if fear was not endless? What if prey could choose to resist? And if one could resist, then others could learn as well. And if they learned, then her people who had built their power on fear would have nothing. The survivors began to see it. Two small changes spreading among them. At first only whispers that Daniel was different, then quiet acts of courage when children cried. Some mothers no longer screamed with them, but held them tight when shadows passed overhead. Some men no longer fled, but stood close together with weapons in hand. They were not fearless, but they were learning from Daniel that fear could be endured, and endured fear gave no strength to the huntress. She felt it every time. Their courage grew. Her hunger clawed inside her sharper than before. Her claws shook. When she struck the walls, her wings felt heavy, her eyes burned, and for the first time she looked at the humans, not as prey, but as a threat, not because of their weapons, but because of the strength of their hearts. One night she cornered Daniel in the ruins, standing before him with her body trembling from hunger. She asked him with a voice that shook, "What makes you unafraid of me?" She had never asked such a question before, because prey never required questions. They only gave screams. Yet here she stood, demanding to know what made this man different. Daniel looked at her, and his voice was quiet, but firm. "Because I have already lost everything you could take from me." His words fell like stones into her mind, and she staggered back because she felt the weight of them. He was not fearless because he was strong. He was fearless because fear had already done its worst, and he had survived it. That truth tore at her more than any blade, because if fear could lose its power, then her people's entire existence was built on a weakness she had never seen before. She looked at him, and for the first time in her long life, she felt the sting of something she did not understand, a chill in her chest. Her kind had no word for it, but the humans had a word, and that word was fear. Daniel turned away from her, again walking into the ruins, and his back seemed heavier than any army. The huntress wanted to strike him down with her claws, to tear him apart, to silence the poison of his calm. But when she raised her hand, her body shook, and she could not move. Her hunger and her doubt chained her in place. Survivors watched from the shadows, whispering to one another. They had seen the huntress tremble. They had seen her hesitate, and the whispers grew into something dangerous. They began to believe she was not invincible, and belief was spreading faster than fear. The huntress retreated to the heights above the colony, her body shaking with rage and weakness. She looked at her claws and saw them dull. She looked at her wings and felt them heavy. She thought of Daniel's eyes and his words, and she screamed into the night sky. But her scream did not bring fear back to her. Instead, it echoed empty across the ruins. She knew she had to end him before his courage destroyed her completely, but she also knew that with every attempt she was losing more of herself, and this truth filled her with a sensation. She could no longer deny the sensation of her own fear. The survivors slept closer together that night. Some even dared to laugh softly under the broken sky. Daniel sat with them, listening to their quiet voices. He did not think of himself as a savior. He thought only of keeping them calm, of holding them steady. But deep inside he knew something had changed, because the huntress who had once walked like death itself now walked with hesitation, and hesitation meant she was no longer untouchable. And while the survivors dreamed of light returning to their world, the huntress lay awake above them, starving and restless, her heart gripped by the very thing she once devoured. They devour fear, yet one human's courage left. The alien Huntress Powerless, and now the colony that once lived only in shadows, began to change. The fear that had filled every broken wall and every dark corner was losing its hold, and what rose in its place was something the huntress had never faced before: hope. The survivors gathered around Daniel, not because he asked them, but because they could feel his strength in him. That quiet strength touched their hearts when mothers carried water. They no longer trembled when fathers lifted stones to build shelter. They no longer looked over their shoulders. Every moment Daniel walked among them, the survivors felt less like prey and more like people again. They whispered his name as if it were a shield. The huntress watched this with burning eyes, her body weaker with each passing night. She had thought that fear was endless. She had believed her kind would never hunger, but now her hunger was eating her from the inside her. Claws shook, her wings dragged when she moved, her voice had lost the sharpness that once made whole crowds. Screamed still, she tried to fight it. She hunted the weak, she whispered terror into the children, but every time Daniel stood nearby their fear dimmed, and without fear she was starving. Daniel spoke to the survivors with words as simple as his heart. He told them courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand even when fear tried to break them. He told them he was not stronger than them. He was only tired of running, and if they stood together, then no huntress, no predator could make them bend. His voice carried no pride, but every word filled the survivors with fire. Huntress grew desperate. She descended one night in fury, her body glowing with rage, her voice cutting through the ruins. She struck down walls with her claws. She screamed into the hearts of the people, showing them visions of fire and death, and for a moment they staggered, but Daniel stood in front of them, his broken pipe in hand, his eyes calm, and when the huntress looked into him, she felt the same emptiness that poisoned her before, and her power faltered. The survivors saw her stumble. They saw her claws shake, and something changed forever in that instant. They realized the great huntress could bleed not with wounds of the body, but with wounds of the spirit. They shouted together, their voices rising into the night. Not screams of terror, but cries of defiance. The sound cut into the huntress sharper than any blade, because their courage spread like fire, and the fear she needed was burning away. The battle was not with weapons, it was with hearts. The huntress clawed the ground and struck the air, but each roar she gave was met with the steady gaze of Daniel and the rising voices of the survivors. She had come to feed, but now every moment starved her more. Her body trembled, her wings cracked, and the fire in her eyes dimmed. She had always believed fear was her weapon, but now she learned fear could be denied. Daniel stepped closer to her, his face calm, his voice heavy with truth. "You will never feed on us again," he said. "We may feel fear, but we choose to stand. We may break, but we will rise again and again." His words struck her chest like chains, and she staggered back, because in his voice she heard something her kind had no weapon for. Survivors rallied behind him, no longer silent shadows, but people who refused to bend. They lifted broken tools and shattered wood, not as weapons of war, but as symbols of their defiance. They shouted that they would not run. They shouted that they would not give her what she hungered for. The huntress felt her power slipping from her like sand through her claws, and she realized the terrifying truth, that she was the one who now trembled. For the first time she felt her own body fill with the taste she had once devoured. It was sharp, it was heavy, it was unbearable. Her heart pounded. Her claws shook, her wings pulled tight, and she knew the name of this poison. It was fear, not theirs, but her own. The predator had become the prey, and the thought broke her spirit. She staggered back, her voice cracking. She tried to summon shadows, but the survivors did not feed them with terror. They stood with Daniel, their eyes burning, and their hearts steady, and the shadows died in silence. She tried to scream, but her scream was hollow. It carried no power, and for the first time, her cry was ignored. Daniel did not strike her with weapons. He only walked closer, step by steady step, and every step filled the survivors with greater strength. The huntress could not bear his eyes. She turned her face away, but there was nowhere to hide. Her body was breaking, not from blades, but from the poison of her own failure. She fell to her knees in the ruins, her claws digging into the ground, her body shaking. Survivors gasped as they saw her like this, the creature who had haunted their nights reduced to trembling. But Daniel's face held no pride. He looked at her with the same heavy calm he had always carried. He spoke quietly, but every survivor heard his words. "You were never strong because of fear. You were only stealing the weakness of others, but weakness ends when we refuse to give it." The huntress bowed her head, her hunger consuming her, pride shattered. She had thought herself untouchable, yet now she was powerless before those she had once called prey. In the silence of her breaking, she realized the cruel truth. that humans could survive even in the darkest ruins because they carried something no predator could devour. Daniel turned back to the survivors, his voice soft. "We are not fearless, but we are more than our fear." His words echoed through the ruins like light in darkness, and the survivors shouted together, their voices rising not in terror but in victory. The huntress trembled at the sound, her chest tight, her breath ragged. She felt the full weight of fear for the first time. And in that moment, she understood the lesson she had never wanted to learn. Humans could endure pain, humans could endure loss, and because of that, they could also endure fear. The predator was broken, the tide had turned, and the night that once belonged to her now belonged to them. They devour fear, yet one human's courage left the alien huntress powerless. And now the story that began with shadows and terror reached its end in the broken colony, where prey became something far greater than the predator had ever imagined. The huntress knelt among the ruins, her claws dug into the dirt, her body shaking, her hunger like fire inside her. She had fed on fear her whole life, never doubting it, never questioning it, and now she felt the poison of her own weakness because one human had shown her that fear could be denied, and in that denial her power had died with it. The survivors gathered around Daniel. They did not hide behind him, now they stood beside him, their voices strong, their hands lifted, not with weapons, but with courage that filled the night air. They had been prey, they had been broken, but tonight they saw the huntress bow, and something inside them healed. They realized they could stand against the shadows, not because fear was gone, but because they were more than their fear. The huntress looked up at Daniel, her eyes no longer burning, but clouded with confusion. Her voice cracked as she asked, "What are you? How can you stand when all others fall before me?" Her kind had never asked such a question because prey had never demanded answers, but Daniel was not prey, and she felt that truth in her bones. Daniel stood tall, though his body was tired, his clothes torn, his hands scarred, his eyes carried a calm that cut deeper than any blade. His voice was low but steady. "We are human, we bleed, we suffer, we fear, but we choose to stand even when it hurts, even when we have nothing left. Fear cannot rule us, because we can walk through it and still move forward." His words struck the huntress harder than any weapon ever could. She shivered as the survivors echoed his strength. They spoke together, voices rising. "We are not prey." The sound shook the ruins louder than her screams ever had. She felt it crawling into her chest, pulling her down with the weight of her own fear. She could not feed on them anymore. Their courage was like a wall, and her hunger starved her into weakness. The huntress tried one last time. She rose with trembling wings and threw her shadow over them, hoping the sight would break their hearts. But instead of screams, she heard voices rising in unity. The survivors shouted back against the shadow, their words carrying light. And in that light her shadow faded until it was nothing. She fell again to her knees, her breath sharp, her body shaking with defeat. Daniel stepped forward, his eyes steady as he looked down at her. He did not strike her, he did not hate her. He only spoke the truth. "You thought fear made you strong, but it only made us stronger because every time we faced it we learned to rise, and now you know the truth, that courage is stronger than fear." The huntress bowed her head. She had never known defeat until now. She had never felt fear until now, and in that moment she understood what her people would never want to admit. Humans could not be broken the way other races were, because their courage grew even in the darkest places. Survivors stood together, their voices strong and clear. The ruins that once echoed with cries of terror now rang with shouts of hope. The huntress could not feed, she could not rise. She could only crawl back into the shadows, her power gone, her pride shattered. She had come to harvest fear, and instead she carried fear away inside her own chest. Daniel did not watch her go. He turned to the survivors, his voice quiet. "It was not me, it was all of us together. We chose to stand, and that is why she fell." His words carried through them, and they knew it was true. His courage had sparked theirs, but it was their choice. that had broken the huntress. They were no longer prey, they were survivors with hearts that no predator could devour. Night passed and the dawn came with soft light over the ruins. The survivors saw the sun rise without terror pressing down on them. For the first time in years they felt free. The huntress and her kind would remember this place as poison, because here they had learned that humans could fight in a way no weapon could match. Far away in the silence of her retreat, the huntress crouched in darkness, her body trembling, her hunger gnawing, but her mind filled with the image of Daniel's eyes, calm, unbroken. And she knew her people would not believe her if she spoke, but the truth lived in her chest, and it was heavier than fear. The truth that humans could endure what others could not. The truth that courage had left her powerless. That day the galaxy would whisper a new tale, not of humans as weak, fragile prey, but of humans as the species that could not be broken by fear. They would remember the colony not as ruins, but as the place where courage rose against shadows. And Daniel, who had lost everything, now carried something greater. He carried the proof that even in ruin humans could stand unafraid. He carried the lesson that fear does not rule those who refuse to kneel. He carried the hope that his people would never again be prey. The story that began with hunger ended with courage. The huntress had come to devour fear, but instead she carried her own. And the humans who once trembled in darkness rose as a light that would never be dimmed. The end.